Today I want to talk about my experience playing in the Li-Ning Mirage Pro, and as far as I know, this is the first shoe in the Mirage series, so it's also referred to as the Li-Ning Mirage Pro 1. If you haven't guessed already, the Mirage Pro is in the speedy and ultra light weight category. It comes in at 293 grams, more or less, in my size, 285 millimeters per shoe, which means it's about 7 to 10 grams heavier than the Yonex Aerus Z2, which is the lightest shoe on the market right now, meaning that it's most likely more suitable for players with a smaller body frame and weighing less kilos than me. Before we get into the details, this one felt a bit too fatiguing for me to play in over the long run, just like my experience was with the Aerus Z2. But I do notice some readers pointing out how much they love these lightweight shoes, and I'm getting the impression that they have a different body frame than me, so that could be why. So today I'm gonna compare the two, and you'll get a sense of how the Mirage Pro is to play with on court, so you can get a feeling of if it might be the right badminton shoe for you. First, let's take a quick look at the design, because I feel like Li-Ning has been really crisp lately with some great shoe designs. The one thing that disappoints me in terms of design is this outsole and this bit here. When I first unboxed the shoe, I thought it was a mistake and that it was some kind of fault with the shoe, because it just looks like it should have been covered by some material or design. But when I researched online and found official product images, I noticed that that was also kind of open, this area, which made me realize that it's supposed to be this way. As usual, I've had this shoe on court for 10 hours. To give you a sense of how it feels to play in, I bought it with my own money to give you an unbiased review. I'm Aske from Beast Badminton, and let's look at the toe box first. Now, as you'd expect with a shoe that attempts to be as low weight as possible, the toe box has minimal cushioning. I usually look for cushioning in the toe box at the very front of the shoe and underneath my feet, because I have a bad habit in my footwork of having super heavy landings, and so I prefer a little bit more cushioning underneath the toes to avoid fatigue. I was expecting it to be more of an issue in the front of the toe box than I found it really was. I didn't notice the fatigue too much, even though I tend to be late when I do lunges, and I have to really do deep lunges to retrieve the shuttle, and so my toes tend to be pushing against the very front of the toe box. On the other hand, I noticed after each session that my toes underneath felt very fatigued. If you have better footwork and don't have these kind of habits that I do, this might not be as big of an issue for you as it is for me. Now, the toe box feels quite narrow as opposed to the Aerus Z2 that I found to feel quite wide, even though this is the non-wide edition. And for me, with feet that are average but maybe slightly on the narrow side, this is a really good fit. Just in terms of the pure fit, I felt much more comfortable and snug in the toe box compared to the Aerus Z. Next, let's dive into the heel support. So in terms of heel support, I found that the Mirage Pro here was quite stiff, offered a great heel support with a bit of cushioning on the inside, but mostly quite a stiff heel. In fact, so stiff that when I was breaking in the shoe at home before I got on court, I got a slight mark on my heel where the heel area connects with the skin, but it was no issue after breaking them in and getting them on court. But if you try them on at the store, keep that in mind. It feels quite narrow as well, and it's definitely on the narrower side, similar to the toe box compared to the Aerus Z2. So the Aerus will be slightly wider, have slightly more of a cushioned feel in the heel support, whereas the Mirage Pro will be slightly narrower, slightly stiffer, but still have some cushioning. So looking at the midsole and the cushioning underneath your feet as you're playing in this Li-Ning Mirage Pro 1. Of course, when you're trying to strip away weight to make it low weight, cushioning and padding underneath your feet is one of the areas that's going to take a hit. And so you have better court feel, you feel closer to the court in this shoe compared to many other bulkier options. But I do feel very fatigued after playing in this shoe. In fact, during my normal 2-hour sessions, I'll begin feeling the fatigue after just the first hour on court. And if I play 2 days in a row with just this pair, my feet are doomed. And it's really a difficult trade-off, because while it feels more comfortable to play in shoes that are bulkier with more padding and I get less fatigued, I do feel as if I play better and I feel faster on court in a shoe like this. Now, if we take a look at the insole in the Mirage Pro, you'll see the usual breathability holes and ventilation holes that we see in many insoles. And to my surprise, we'll see this wavy pattern, which is great for avoiding to slide within the shoe itself. It also has this reasonably soft texture, but nothing spectacular for an insole in a flagship badminton shoe. If we compare with the Aerus Z2, you'll see the difference here. It feels much more like a generic insole, whereas the Mirage Pro has a bit more slide resistance in terms of this wavy pattern. I did find myself sliding a lot more while testing the Aerus Z2, and I mean sliding within the shoe because of the insole compared to the Mirage Pro. It didn't mean that I didn't slide within the Mirage Pro at all. It was just, it took longer before it started to happen, and it wasn't as much. This should be no surprise, but the upper and especially the sides of the Mirage feel narrow, just like the heel and the toe box, and slightly narrower than the Aerus Z2. But one thing that I loved about the Aerus Z2 was this super wide tongue. Now the tongue is not as wide in the Mirage, but it's still wider than average, which means it's less likely to slide down the side. So due to the slightly narrower fit, it seems like the tongue doesn't need to be as wide to get the same result. So the fit at the upper here with the tongue and the shoelaces is great, and again slightly more on the snug side of things. Of course, in this super lightweight shoe, I didn't have much of an issue with ventilation. On the left, we have the Mirage Pro, and on the right, we have the Li-Ning Saga 2 SE. This is a super heavy duty shoe. This is a super lightweight badminton shoe. And these are both flagship shoes within their respective series within the Li-Ning brand, but their outsole grip looks quite different. Interestingly, they feel about the same and have great grip. I've previously said that I like the Yonex radial blade sole grip the most, but these two are on par with that. So let's move on to durability. These featherweight, super speedy, lightweight badminton shoes tend to have a reputation of worse or lower durability than your average top-tier badminton shoe, and that seems to be the case with the Aerus that I tested. But The Li-Ning seems to be holding up quite nicely so far. Of course, a 10-hour test on court doesn't tell us that much about durability, but I have a few clues that I look at as a reference point relative to other badminton shoes that I test on court. And there's two things that I tend to look at the most. First, the outsole tear, which is here on the outsole. And as you can see, it looks perfect. No complaints here, but sometimes it can be torn off, which makes you slide around the court if you're stepping right in that area. But so far so good. The next one is the lunge tear, when we're using the non-racket foot and grinding to control the movement when we are lunging. And this doesn't look as good. You'll see it here, and you'll notice that it's slightly beginning to come off in that area, and you'll notice that it doesn't have that much extra padding to protect in this very area. If we compare with the Aerus Z2, now this is the racket foot for me, so don't worry about the lunge tear in that area since it's not the same side of the shoe. What I wanted to illustrate is this extra padding here to protect against this very tear, which we don't really have here. It looks like there's some basic rubber fabric or something that's very thin, and it's already coming off, it seems. So the durability from the lunge tear is in line with what I saw on the Aerus, and it's not great, but for now it passes the test. But we'll see in future tests against other shoes how well it's holding up. Next, let's move on to the verdict. Let's begin the verdict with a quick recap. So overall, this shoe is a bit narrower all the way from the heel support to the toe box through the sides of the middle here compared to the Aerus Z2. It's a bit stiffer in the heel support. It has a bit of cushioning, but not as much as the Aerus. It feels a bit stiffer and a bit more snug and a better log-in, something I prefer. Now the sides feel well ventilated. The shoe didn't feel hot to play in. The tongue is nice. I didn't have any issues with it sliding down the side. The toe box gave me surprisingly no issues at the very front, even though it has basically little to no cushioning. But I did feel super fatigued from heavy landings underneath my toes in the toe box, and the cushioning underneath is very limited as well. So if you're someone my size or bigger, expect fatigue underneath your feet if you're playing in this shoe for the long run. I also did find myself sliding within the shoe a little bit, but less so than with the Aerus Z2, for example. Basically, if you're someone with a smaller body frame than me, you'll probably like this category of shoe. And then the way I would decide would be, do you prefer a shoe that's narrower and feels more locked in, or do you like a shoe with a touch more cushioning, but also a much wider fit? And if you want the wider fit, you go with the Aerus, even though this is not the wide edition. And if you want the slightly narrower fit, you go with the Mirage Pro. Finally, I'd like to point out that I could feel no difference in weight between the Mirage and the Aerus Z2. So if you are an intermediate player like me, who likes this category of shoes, you're unlikely to feel the difference in weight. If you're interested in ratings and comparisons to other similar badminton shoes, check out the blog. I'm Aske from Beast Badminton, and I'll see you on court.